This is our behind the scenes series, and tonight is the second episode. Last week we had a wonderful launch with Saul Klein, and tonight he hands over the baton to the leader of Camden Council, Georgia Gould. I'm going to ask my dad to say a few words of introduction.
Georgia, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, thank you to you and to all of your councillors for the enormous support that you always give to South Hampstead Synagogue, to the Jewish community in Camden. We're extremely grateful, and thank you very much for coming on to all these 52 people who are just waiting to hear you this evening. What we thought when we contacted you was Camden is a huge borough, and it's enormously diverse. And we know that there are a very substantial number of people who have all kinds of needs, and Camden is exceptionally good at looking after these people. It must have been a very difficult time for you and your colleagues, and we'd just love to hear from you for about 10 minutes before we open to questions, how you've been behind the scenes, how you've been dealing with it, the challenges that you have found, how you've been able to find the vulnerable people, what you've been able to do for them, what the real pressures are for you, how you managed to deal with your own staffing issues and furloughs and things like that. Just take us behind the scenes, because you folks are running a really big show, we know that, and we're fascinated to hear from you how it's been going.
Okay, well, really wonderful to be here with you this evening and to see lots of familiar faces and friends, and to take over from the wonderful Saul last week. So thank you so much for having me. I mean, behind the scenes in my life at the moment is probably like a lot of you, a kind of full day of Zoom calls and muting and unmuting people, and kind of saying, oh, can everyone just put their button on mute? So, and being dragged out once a day by my fiance for our state-sponsored exercise. But we do have, a huge challenge in responding to COVID, and reflecting on speaking to you today. I think it was the March the 13th that I think the things we really started to understand what we were facing. Thinking back, I remember there was a meeting we had as London leaders, and we started to hear the scale of the challenge and some of what was then the kind of worst case scenario around potentially 500,000 people losing their lives around the country. And they were talking about numbers like 60,000 in London, and everything that meant for us in terms of mortuary services and just the trauma for our communities. And I remember all of us just sitting there kind of reeling from that. And I think as any kind of leader, and I think the rabbis will feel this, and everyone in the different roles you have, you want to protect the people in your community or your workplace. And I think it was really difficult to hear the scale of a challenge, and that we couldn't totally stop it, but we had to do what we could to support our community through it. And that weekend, so that was, I think, the Friday, my grandmother, who was 93, passed away, not of COVID, but she was 93. She was old. She'd been very unwell, and she was very ready to go. I think at the time we were in hospital, and she was trying to persuade all the doctors to finish her off, to much to their bemusement. But we, in that time, got to be with her. There was never a moment that she wasn't alone, and she had a good death, surrounded by family. And we were with her, and we got to mourn her afterwards. And I think that happening just before all of this had a big impact on me, and just how we keep our humanity through this, and recognize that that people were going to lose their lives, but that we had to really understand that each life was precious, that each relationship was precious, and that the kind of pain of loneliness and not being able to be with your family, what that meant, and how we could support people through that. And so I think we were really trying to think about how we brought empathy and humanity to this huge challenge and to what we were seeing as a community. And that was, you know, from the beginning, what we tried to do. And that we set out a few principles from the start. The first was that no one would go hungry in our community as a result of COVID. The second was that nobody in any of our housing, and we have 33,000 council homes in Camden, would be evicted because they couldn't pay their rent because of COVID. And those who are in our care staff, who are caring for our most vulnerable, that they would, you know, get full sick pay, that they would be supported through this, which unfortunately doesn't happen everywhere. And so we've tried to kind of put to build up a new social infrastructure really in a matter of days. And I remember that same weekend spending a lot of time actually talking to Saul, who is on this call, who is helping connect us with a lot of tech organizations, and bringing together our community sector around this huge challenge of supporting people who would have to be at home. And we did that in a number of ways. We very quickly looked at redeploying our staff. So we did a survey of all of our staff and what their skill set were. And as we started to move away from providing leisure services, from the planning process, we redeployed those staff into food distribution. So we had librarians and sports staff leading food distribution, calling vulnerable people. We had people who usually do repairs, driving food to people who had to be at home. And we stepped up those services really quickly, working with partners like Age UK. So Age UK have those strong relationships already. People trust them. They know their community, and they had a lot of people who could usually afford to buy food, but were finding, because of the stockpiling we saw at the start of the crisis, that they couldn't get supermarkets. They couldn't get their spot at supermarkets. We also have a huge amount of food poverty in Camden. Almost half of our children grow up in poverty. So there were those who couldn't get access to food. There are those who are already facing food poverty, and those who, because of losing their job, were forced into poverty through this crisis. So we've worked with Age UK, we've worked with our food banks and bolstered their supplies, and we've developed our own direct distribution. And to date, I think we've handed out almost 6,000 food packages. 1,000 of those go to people who are in that shielded group, but the rest go to those who either are facing food poverty or who are vulnerable in a different way and can't have access to food. At the same time, we have always had a very active homelessness outreach service, but the kind of increased risk to those who are on our streets through COVID, I think has been widely discussed, and you know, the statistics in terms of life expectancy for those who are homeless are already devastating. But we were really concerned, as was government, about those on our streets. So we have usually about 600 hostel places, but we worked with hotels to secure extra beds for those who are homeless, and we've now housed in hotels temporarily around 150 people, and we are providing them with hot food every day. But unfortunately, we're still continuing to see more people who are becoming homeless or coming into Camden as a borough which still has people around, which still has activity. So that kind of outreach team is working all the time, and we've again redeployed staff into that team. And I think what we've really seen through this, in the council and the community, is what I often talk about. I think I talked to some people in the school about this a lot, is the kind of spirit that Camden has. It is a community where people do come forward, which has a real kind of heart of compassion and neighbourhood, despite the fact that we're in the centre of a big city. And we've really seen that with the mutual aid groups that have sprung up around the borough, but also with our own staff. And you know, it's been really overwhelming, some of what we've seen, people kind of volunteering to do really difficult things. We've had staff volunteering to work in mortuaries, moving bodies. We've had staff who've volunteered to work weekends doing homelessness outreach when that has never been their job before. We've seen our caretakers, you know, really putting themselves at risk to continue to do their job. And when I talk to people, and, you know, I've been doing calls to frontline staff, they say how proud they feel to be part of a response, and how proud they feel to be serving Camden. And, you know, and likewise, the kind of thanks and support they've had from so many people, from thank you notes on bins to in windows, and as they've said, has meant a huge amount. And as people have talked about, for the first time, feeling like they're really valued and seen as an equal in the work that they do. So I think that whole community response and how that has linked to the public sector response has been really special. Another kind of area I mentioned was care homes, and we were from the beginning really concerned about our care homes and the extra pressure on them. And we've from the start been having daily phone calls with all of Camden's care homes, and we didn't completely rely on the government's PPE, so we did our own procurement for PPE. So we've been able to support our care homes with PPE throughout this, and we've had to put in extra capacity and support where there have been issues, whether that's, you know, support with managers or extra care staff, and we've been there to have that kind of relationship and actually financial support where necessary to ensure that they are able to continue to care for residents. But again, we've seen staff move into care homes or to hotels in order to protect the safety of those they work for, and they, you know, those they serve, and their response has been amazing. The other challenge we were seeing is people who had COVID being asked to come into care homes, and the risk that bore for those communities. So we work with the NHS to create new new beds that people could go to before they go into care homes and recover, and that has helped to protect our care homes. We still sadly have seen people pass away due to COVID in our care homes, and one of the challenges that we hear a lot about in the media, but we've certainly seen in Camden, is lack of access to testing. So for a long time we weren't, you know, we suspected COVID for some of our cases because we didn't have tests for those individuals. We couldn't be sure that was, you know, what they had, or that was sadly what some people died of. And again, we've really struggled to get testing for care home staff. That is starting to pick up, but at first it was kind of big is in car parks in Wembley, and lots of our care staff don't have cars. So that's an area where we've been putting a lot of pressure on government, and we are starting to see some change. I know across London and the country, I hear from colleagues some really difficult stories about lack of PPE, about being asked to take COVID positive patients into care homes and those risks. So I think is definitely one of the areas we've seen a lot of issues in Camden, but around the country. But again, we've worked really hard to kind of support our care homes. I think another area that I think where we've seen increased vulnerability is around domestic abuse. So we already have very unfortunately high levels of domestic abuse, in Camden and around London, but there's huge risk of people being at home. And so again, we've tried to step up services. For families, but also for individuals, particularly women, but domestic abuse can happen to anyone, to ensure that there's extra welfare checks, that there's information and text lines so people can raise issues without having to phone. We've been working across London to increase refuge beds, so people who do have to move out can, because understandably a lot of the housing pathways that would usually happen where people move out of refuges to free up space aren't happening. And we've worked on the preventative scheme where we see families are kind of reaching crisis point and in a lot of stress. We're able to give families respite from each other in order to prevent situations of abuse occurring. So but that continues to be a big concern, and across London we think we've seen about a 10% rise, and it's a challenge we're working on together. And there's so much to talk about, but I thought I'd just give some reflections on what I've seen over the last 6 weeks or so, and what we're looking to in the future. I think that definitely what we've seen is that this crisis has shone a light on existing inequalities. So we have seen that the health inequalities that already existed are...
Georgia, I'm going to interrupt you because I want to come to the future after we've spoken a bit more about the present, and we'll,
Sure.
because there's lots that we'd like to ask you about the future. But it sounds like even up to this stage, you've had a pretty big in-tray. And we'd like to invite the 60 people plus who are with us this evening to put their questions to you, and then we'll come back to the issues relating to the future. So you know how to do it. David Katz has raised his hand. If you go to participants, you can see that you can raise a hand. If you don't know how to do that, you'll just unmute yourself. But we'd want to try and avoid people all unmuting at the same time, because when everybody's unmuted at the same time, it makes a cat's choir sound sweet by comparison. So David Katz, Professor Katz.
To clarify before David starts,
Yeah.
I'm actually going to unmute people. So either raise a hand or put a message in the chat box that you'd like to ask a question, and then I'll unmute you. That's exactly what I've just done for David.
Okay.
Thank you. I just wanted to first of all say a word of thanks to Georgia, and in particular to Councillor High, who has been a strong ally of the Jewish community, not only in Camden, but in general, in relationship to the whole question of handling of death, burials, mortuaries, and really has been, it's in an interfaith capacity, but he has been a very good friend. With regard to that situation, however, the question is, linking into your inequalities item maybe for later as well. Of course, Camden is the model where the train, if you go along the underground from Hampstead down into Euston, that's where kind of the biggest drop in life expectancy occurs almost in the country. Maybe are there differences that you're noticing between the different areas in relationship to mortality, to morbidity and mortality?
Yes, there are. So I was just going on to say that we are seeing, I think it is shining a spotlight on existing inequalities. We do think we're seeing a disproportionate impact on Black and minority ethnic communities, actually including the Jewish community. We think that some of that is where there's more likely to be intergenerational living, and that might be causing some of it. But we are doing a lot of research on this, and we've looked at all the data from our GPs and from our hospitals to try and get a picture. What it doesn't show is that deaths are more likely to happen in low income areas. Actually, the data shows that there is a high proportion of deaths in low income areas, but actually the highest proportion of deaths in Camden have been in high income areas. And we think that part of that was at the start of the crisis, and this is just me, this is just our initial thinking because we're doing a lot of research into this. Part of that was, I know at the start of the crisis that it particularly impacted people who've been traveling, and that's where a lot of the kind of first cases came from. And obviously people who have a higher disposable income are more likely to have been traveling. But I think we're starting to see that pattern change, and transmission is more likely to happen where there's overcrowded families and where people are living very close to each other, and also where people are going out to work as key workers or in shops and so on. We have been doing a lot of work to try and get information and public health information out in different languages to different community groups, working actually with faith leaders, with imams, with community leaders to try and ensure that everyone has got access to the information and messages. And we are putting a submission into the government's review on disproportionality, and continuing to kind of look at this really closely. But it has been more in terms of impacting our Black and ethnic minority community. At the moment, we're seeing that as the biggest trend.
Ellie?
Rebecca
A couple
Filer.
of hands up.
Yeah, Rebecca Filer, here you go.
Hi, Georgia. I have a question about youth violence. Obviously, it's a big problem in Camden, and the fact that kids aren't going to school, or they're not able to, like, because of social distancing, they're stuck at home, and they're like not really being given the support that they would normally have. What's Camden Council doing to step in and make sure that basically young people are kept safe?
Yeah, thank you for that. And it's something we've sadly seen over the last 2 years. There's a huge rise in youth violence, and I think we had seen a decrease obviously during the lockdown period, but we did have a shooting the night before last in Gospel Oak. Thankfully the man survived. He actually wasn't a young person, but we did see that violent incident, and we don't know more about it at this stage. In terms of young people, some young people are still going to school, and we've tried to put a lot of support in for those young people who are at home. Again, talking about shining a light on existing inequalities. I think what this has shown is how many young people don't have digital access. And so at some schools, it's as high as 65% of children don't have access to a device or to Wi-Fi. So that means that it's difficult for them to learn, but also to access youth support and different activities, or the kind of thing that kind of community event that we're having tonight. So we've had a big campaign around trying to get donations of laptops and other devices to get out to children and young people. And we've also been doing a huge amount of food support for our children on free school meals. So we're doing food packages on top of the numbers I gave earlier for every young person who's on free school meals in Camden. So that's thousands of food packages that have been going out each week. Our youth services are still there, and they're doing welfare checks on all of the young people that they usually work with, and they are organising activities and events, and there's a whole host of really creative online activities and debates that are going on, but as I said earlier, they're not all young people are able to access them. I think that the kind of scarring and trauma effects of this period on young people is one of the kind of untold stories, and the level of overcrowding we have in some families is enormous. We have families where there's 7 people living in one room, and how difficult it is to stay in lockdown in that situation is obviously immense. And we're trying to ensure that they're getting messages about that they can go out for their daily exercise, that we are giving respite where we can, and that we are getting as many of those young people able to go to school, because vulnerable children can go to school. But we are seeing increasing frustration from teenagers from the lockdown, and increasing numbers kind of just hanging out, which is understandable. So our youth workers are kind of going out, outreaching on the phone, but it's really hard to deliver quality youth work while you're social distancing.
Morris Rayner.
It's actually Carol.
Just a bunch of people asking questions. If you have chosen not to show your video, when you ask your question, would you mind just showing yourself, if you're able to, if you can put your video on, just so that Georgia can see exactly who she's speaking to. Okay, sorry, carry on with your question, please.
Hi, Georgia. You're doing an amazing amount of work. It's really interesting. I've been working on a couple of council estates before all this with Susie Plum, who on a project on interviewing people who are particularly interesting, but they were in council estates, low-rise ones. And I was just curious that in high-rise council estates where issues must be even greater. First of all, 2 questions. One is, I noticed that community life in the ones that I visited was brilliant. People were really, really together. This was before coronavirus. But I just wondered what happened in high-rise. But say you've got young kids, do they have any plans about who can use the outdoor facilities at a particular time, if they have them? Is there are corridors used for activities for toddlers? I mean, I was just kind of wondering how people rallied round in those really difficult accommodation circumstances.
Well, I talked a bit about the mutual aid earlier and the way that
you did
communities come together, and I think we are really seeing that on estates. So we're seeing that on streets, but we're also seeing that on estates, TRAs coming together to do food distribution, to check in on vulnerable people and families, and you know, we often have play services and different activities on estates. We've seen examples of activity packs being handed out to children and young people. What we haven't seen kind of corridors being used for those kind of activities, because I think people are trying to observe the social distancing guidelines, and so not to kind of come together with people outside of their household, and we're not encouraging them to do so. And unfortunately, because of that, we've had to close the children's playgrounds and sports pitches, which I know is really difficult, and it, you know, there is one of those situations where, following you know, the guidance, and we all are to try and keep each other safe and to protect the NHS, you know, when we talk about the existing inequalities, it's so much harder for some people than for others, and I think we're really aware of that difficulty. In areas like hostels, where we have a lot of families living, we are putting in some extra support. So we're, as kind of family groups, we're working around childcare just to give some respite to the overcrowding. So we are doing that, and we're looking at, if this lockdown continues, to expanding that to some of our larger estates. But yeah, we are, one of the things that I was talking to a teacher, we have around this, is called the Happiness Hamper Project, where we're giving food that is distributed to families, and she was saying that she'd been, you know, delivering this food, and she spoke to some families that had at that point been inside for 3 weeks. They were so scared about the virus that they hadn't left their flats at all, despite severe overcrowding. And so we have been really trying to get the message out about using our parks, and saying to everyone, you know, if you have a garden, especially at the weekend, hold back, you know, for some of our more overcrowded families to use those parks and green spaces. Okay, thank you.
A couple of hands up.
Well, yeah, I've also got some chats here. Dr. Michael Furr's next. Just going to unmute you. You're on.
Thank you. Georgia, thank you very much. Very good decision. One, you mentioned also about testing and clearly the distance people might have to travel, but for a community, I mean, I work in the hospital and the university, and we're very lucky, we are being tested. But for the community, one of the most reassuring things would be for not only for care home workers or hospital staff to be tested, but also the community. So do you have any jurisdiction or about getting testing kits out and how to do that? Or is it all just national?
Yeah, so the testing is the one thing that is entirely national. So where we have been able to procure our own PPE, with the testing capacity is being rolled out nationally, and we aren't able to do it ourselves. We have been pushing really hard to get more testing facilities, and we've now got one in the British Library, which is a walk-in facility, which at least gives more capacity to frontline workers and care workers. I absolutely agree on the points around testing and community tracing being the best way out of this, and you know, all of the public health evidence demonstrates that. I think the government are working on a national plan on this, and as local government, I sit on the board of the Local Government Association, which represents local government, and I'm the deputy chair of London Council, so in a lot of the London conversations around this. And I think we are really pushing really hard to say that we do have capacity. We have at pace been able to stand up huge capacity. You know, we've put tens of millions of pounds out in business grants, we've and business rates relief, we've done this kind of food distribution. We can help in community tracing and testing, but we haven't yet had that dialogue. So it is something that, you know, we are continuing to look at, and whether there's more we can do around community tracing, but it is difficult without that kind of interface with national government.
Ben Leon.
Hello, hi Georgia. Hi, Georgia. Thank you very much for everything that you're doing. Just have two sort of questions. One is based on the budget. You've been amazing at the response that you've been able to provide, and I'm sure you might have been coming onto this about the future, but in terms of all of that support, I know there's been an injection from a national government level, but how long does Camden have in terms of its own pockets to provide? Just on sponsored exercise in the mornings when I go for a walk or a run. I'm noticing that the traffic levels seem to be rising on a daily basis. And I just wondered whether you're tracking that across London and whether that sort of is an indication as to how long us as a society and Londoners are going to be able to cope with the current restrictions on lockdown.
Yeah, they're two great questions. On the money, we kind of, the message originally from government was, you know, whatever it takes. And they said to us, you know, we have a weekly call with Robert Jenrick as leaders of councils, and he was very clear, we just want you to spend and to meet the need in your communities, and the money will be forthcoming from government. I have to say that message has changed slightly in the last kind of week or so, and government have started to talk about burden sharing with local government to meet the cost. Which is a real concern for us, because we've had 2 injections of money from central government. So the first 1.6 billion fund gave 9 million to Camden, and the latest one, it's 7.4 million. It's 7 point something, I think it's 7.4 million that came in yesterday. We think that over 3 months, the lost income and spend is just over 40 million. So that's already a huge gap for us. It's kind of stepping up new services in the way that I described, but it's also the lost income is enormous. So, for example, we've relaxed all of our parking controls and been completely focused in parking on parking spaces for key workers and the NHS, police, and so on. And we provided, I think, now over 4,000 parking spaces for key workers. Well, that is a lost income of 2 million a month. So it's huge for us. We're also seeing we've put a lot of hardship support in for our poorest residents. So for our poorest residents, we've given them 3 months off paying council tax, and done a lot of welfare assistance. And as we said, no one will be evicted. As people are losing their jobs and it's taking a while for them to get universal credit, we're having to support people and let people off paying council tax. And also, you know, we've had big kind of grants come in for businesses from central government, but we've also had a lot of people just stop paying business rates because they can't afford to, who aren't eligible for those grants. So across the piece, the lost income is enormous, and we expect that could rise to close to 80 million over 9 months. And that is a huge hole in our budget. So this isn't, you know, a Camden picture. This is across local government. We're seeing similar holes. And that is a huge concern, because, you know, if you know, our budget gap before this was 35 million, but just because of the continuing austerity, we had a financial plan to close it that we were kind of close to completing. But, you know, what we don't want to see is come out of this crisis, see this kind of hugely increased need, because those homeless residents, those people in food poverty, we can't just leave them and then not have the money to meet it. And all the kind of people who I think heroically have got us through this crisis, suddenly their jobs are at risk. So I think there is a big, you know, we've seen big investment in the NHS, which is right, but I think investment in local government is just as important. And so that is a big question to continue, and something that we're going to be really lobbying on a cross-party basis. And I think in Camden, across London and nationally, we are really, as local government, working together and, you know, in a non-partisan way. Traffic levels, yes, we are monitoring it. We are seeing increases in traffic and in people out in general. I think that you know, there is a sense that, you know, that people are starting to listen less. I think as we hear the media reports of reductions in cases past the peak, and I think Boris not being around for a bit, I think kind of helped that kind of lack of clarity about where we are. So we are trying to increase those messages in the short term around social distancing and staying at home. But yeah, I think that kind of fabric of that contract, I suppose, with the community is starting to fray a bit.
So if anybody who is participating would like to make a donation of between 40 and 60 million pounds to the council, could you please put your name on a postcard and address it to Georgia? Ellie, who's the next question?
Denise Lester, please.
Hi, Georgia, thank you so much for speaking to us. Okay, I'm going to preface what I say by what I do, which is I'm a solicitor specialising in family law, including childcare work. And I do work professionally with Camden's safety net. I'm also on the special emergency duty list for the Central Family Court during this time of lawyers who will actually go down if we have to as well. My concern is that, to me, it seems there's an awful lot of children who are locked up with their parents across the borough, as well as nationally, with increased domestic abuse, substance abuse, alcohol use, and social services, social workers can't necessarily get in to monitor them or monitor them. The schools would normally do the monitoring. So I guess this may even be a conversation offline, but what is the council doing for those children who are at pre-proceeding stage or pre-looked after children, so they don't have to go to school? And also, do you anticipate an absolute, well, frankly, a substantial increase, I'm putting it mildly, in child protection work and court proceedings after the lockdown? Because there are children out there who are in untenable situations, but the media's not talking about it. The focus is on domestic abuse. And also, we see no signs of the lockdown easing at the present time.
Yeah, I think that those are really good questions and something we're talking about and working on a lot. In terms of our social work team, we are checking in regularly with those families who were at risk, and we have an early help team. So early help, for I know you know, but for everyone else, is that kind of layer below social work, and so they are doing weekly welfare checks on those families that we consider to be vulnerable. We're using food as a means to support safeguarding. So where we're delivering food, it's a way to get into families where we're concerned. Vulnerable children and children in need should be at school, and we have been working really hard to make sure that they are at school, because it gives that visibility, as you talked about. And we thankfully have seen numbers of those children increase. So the two groups for everyone that should be at school are key. The children are key workers to kind of to keep things moving in the NHS, but also those vulnerable children. And so we're seeing increases each week in those children attending school. But also just to reassure you that we are still taking procedures. So we have, through this COVID crisis, have children who have come into care because they've been at risk. So we're not stopping that safeguarding work, and if anything, we're increasing it. So I do hope, and I think that we are kind of picking up on issues as best we can. But I think that, yeah, I think you're completely spot on, that the kind of hidden crisis in all of this. You know, we've heard a lot about older people who are isolated, and that's so important and something we're really focused on. But you know, children being at home all day in risky situations where there's a lot of emotion is you know, the real risk of this crisis, and it's something that we're hyper aware of and isn't talked about enough nationally, I think.
Shefras, you're next. Just we should all be mindful, we have about 15 minutes left of the session, so getting towards the stage of final questions after Sue. And there are a couple of questions in the chat that we're going to turn to, if that's all right, Georgia. After Sue, let's give you a chance to glance at those questions in the chat, and then we'll come into Adrian Cohen shortly as well.
Hi, Georgia. I wanted to ask you about homelessness, something that's very close to my heart. I've been reading lots of different articles in the press, and there's loads of new offshoots of organisations that have been setting up and providing food and all sorts of different kinds of care. But it's really quite confusing, because normally one knows who those organisations are, but at the moment I have no idea. There's loads of them. I read about something called Under One Sky. There was Compassion London. there's a whole stream of them. And I just wondered whether there was a sort of central diary or central collection of names that you could follow, because I support a number of shelters and I do get things that I could pass through to different organisations because if there's different needs.
Yeah, so we've got on Camden's website, we've got a directory of all of the organisations that are supporting the crisis. So all of the voluntary sector, including homelessness. But we also have our own street outreach team, and we have one single point of referral with its own telephone number and email address, which in terms of referring a homeless person that you think is at risk, I think is the best route to take, because our outreach team can then link them in to support. In Camden, we have we've got a contract with an organisation. Greenwood is our Centre for Independent Living, which usually has a kind of cafe and catering service, and we're working with them to provide hot food to all 800 homeless people in the borough. So we're doing that centrally. We are working with voluntary and community organisations, but just to ensure everyone has a hot meal, that's the approach we're taking. So Neil said to me that there might be interest in kind of how people could help and the different organisations. So I will, after this call, just circulate some of that key information. There's a Camden Giving Fund, which is we've donated to as Camden Council £100,000, but is a public donation. I think they've raised £50,000, and that money is going to food banks, to homeless outreach charities. There's a central volunteering brokerage service that Camden Council is running with Volunteer Centre to help support all the community organisations. And there's the directory that I mentioned that has all the list of organisations. So I'll make sure to send that round. And we do have a hotline for people who are in need in any way for them to call and get support.
Thank you.
Right, Georgia, should we turn to Simon Glass and Pamela? Their questions in the chat box. We'll just give you a chance to have a look at them.
Yes, so the Doreen Lawrence's report, which Keir Starmer is leading on. So there's in terms of the impact and disproportionality, there's 3 reports, just to confuse everyone, going on. So there's Kevin Fenton, who's the Mayor of London's public health lead, is doing a report for Public Health England and also one for London. The government are doing a report into disproportionality, which Camden are putting, and Abdul Hai is leading. I know somebody mentioned Abdul earlier, and he's been really pushing this brilliantly. So we're doing a submission into that. And then Keir Starmer, as the new leader of the Labour Party, has commissioned a report from Doreen Lawrence. And I actually had a chat with the person who's kind of helping coordinate at the moment. And there isn't a kind of set panel that is supporting that, but I know that they had an initial conversation, and I know that there were representatives from the Jewish community in that, and that is kind of one of the areas they're looking at, but I don't know much more about it, except that we will be kind of sending through our information to it. Food banks, people needing food in Gospel Oak. In terms of if you have calls from people who need food, I think 2 places to go, either to call the council line, which is 0207 974 4444, and it's option 9, and they can be kind of directly referred, or to go on the directory that I mentioned. And I know QCCA are doing food distribution in Gospel Oak, and they're actually, during Ramadan, they're giving out food every evening from the centre. But we are, in terms of how we are kind of financially supporting food banks, but also kind of brokering food, and we've just got 15,000 food parcels coming through from Arsenal Football Club, who've donated them, which is brilliant. And we're working with the Phoenix Project to ensure that there is food going out to those food banks. And point about fruit is well made, so I will raise that. So the government isn't assisting it. Well, sorry, that's not true. The government has set up a hardship fund, and we've had money from the government for the hardship fund that we're channeling into communities. We're topping that up, so it's a welfare assistance program. So you know, we're still advising people around claiming benefits if they fall out of work and need extra support, and you know, that is the first route. But sometimes it's a wait to get there. I know that there's been huge waits to sign up to universal credit. So we have an emergency assistance program. So when if people don't have food or any money in their account, they can apply to the council, and we will give that emergency assistance. There's lots of information on our website about the hardship fund and how to apply. In terms of council tax and meeting council tax for residents, we are kind of expecting most people to continue to pay their rent. But if anyone has problems paying their rent, we're asking them to get in touch, and we're kind of on an individual basis working with them to support them through that. We're not, as I said earlier, we're not going to evict anyone because they can't pay their rent through this. So we've written to every council tenant to kind of let them know who to call and to give them that support. And we have 12,000 now, just under 12,000 people who don't pay any council tax at all because they're part of our council tax reduction scheme, which is the most generous in London. And that is, you know, a choice we've made to given, you know, the pressure people are under to take the lowest paid or the most disadvantaged in our community out of paying council tax. And we're also encouraging new people who have become financially vulnerable through this to apply to the council tax reduction scheme. I hope that makes sense. I know it's a lot.
Georgia, I want to take us back now to the point at which I rudely interrupted you at a much earlier stage. And now that we've been through all the awful stuff and the difficult things that you've had to do, and sounds like it's been done with enormous thought and competence and energy. But what are your thoughts for the future?
Yeah, I think what this, as I was saying earlier, I think this crisis has kind of demonstrated the inequalities that already exist, whether it be overcrowding, lack of digital access, or food poverty, and I suppose how precarious our economy is for so many. But it's also shown what kind of spirit and energy there is in our communities. And I think that the mutual aid movement that we've seen spring up has been amazing. And also the capacity of local authorities, even though we've seen 10 years of austerity, that we are able to mobilize at pace, and that we can enable and support business and communities. So, you know, for me, I think that we're starting to talk about recovery and think about recovery, but recovery can't just be going back to exactly how things were. I think we want to rebuild a more inclusive economy, one that that values people better and doesn't have such a detrimental impact on our climate. And so as we think about that, we're you know, asking the question of what kind of conditionality we can put onto the support that we're giving businesses in order to value some of these things. We are talking to government about what extra investment we need in order to lead that recovery. So some of the ideas we have are kind of a new green New Deal. We need huge retrofitting on all of our council properties in order to make them more sustainable and also to reduce fuel bills. That's a kind of source of new jobs. We know over 150,000 people in London have applied for universal credit. So we're talking about what it would look like to step up whole scale new jobs, train people into those, and support a different economy. We're asking for a jobs guarantee that pays the wages of people to do socially useful work. So whether it's the kind of the green work we talked about, or helping some of the capacity in the voluntary sector, you know, we expect some people to need support for maybe 2 years. So it's not going to be a kind of quick exit to this. So we're working with the economist Mariana Mazzucato on a renewal task force, we're calling it, to bring together the voluntary sector, the businesses. Saul is one of the members of our task force, and to start to kind of map out what that future looks like, and to scale up, I think, some of really positive work that's going on, but also to work with our big institutions, our universities, to shape that different future. And I think that, that we definitely, it feels like it's a moment that you can have a really different conversation. And I think people have seen what's possible when we act at pace and at scale. We can take hundreds of people off the street. We can distribute food to ensure no one goes hungry. We just have to have the political will to do it. So that's the conversation we want to lead as Camden, but with boroughs around the country, and hopefully working with government to do that.
So Georgia, thank you for that. And can I say, on behalf of the South Hampstead community,
sorry, just to jump in, because there was one more question hanging. Adrian Cohen from earlier. I don't want to distract us from finishing in a couple of minutes. So a quick question and a quick response. Oh, Adrian, hang about. Whilst I'm unmuting you, Adrian, of course, people will want to help the borough on an individual basis, and many are already doing so. Rachel Roberts, together with Neil Moss, are coordinating a South Hampstead Synagogue community response, and we'll be in touch with the borough in due course to discuss the best way to be able to coordinate that. But you've pointed us in the direction of what's already available and laid out online. So thank you for that, Georgia. But we always appreciate what the borough gives us, and we continuously want to return that and give back to the borough. Adrian.
Quite a nice thing to what I was going to ask, which was at City Hall level, there's a lot of interfaith community faith participation under the Deputy Mayor of London for Fire and Resilience, Fiona Twycross. And lots of Jewish communal organisations are involved there, like the Board of Deputies and the London Jewish Forum. And it's looking at issues around bereavement and bereavement support, social care and volunteering. And I was just wondering, to what extent does the kind of activity around City Hall speak to what's happening at Camden local government level as well? Just to, and are there any gaps, things we can practically do to try and sort of join the dots more than maybe aren't at the moment?
I think that we're probably working closer together than we ever have before. So I have a daily call, and Fiona's often on it with City Hall, kind of in my representing London Council's hat. And I think we're seeing real synergy and support from City Hall, and we're working very closely together. I think, to be honest, at the beginning, we were all just trying to respond as quickly as we could to the crisis. There wasn't great information flow from government. I think we were finding stuff out in the news the same as everyone else. So that's how we found out about lockdown. But Sadiq has really helped us to kind of connect up and have a proper structured conversation with government. And so that is working really well. And we have our own faith forum that Neil sits on and contributes to from the synagogue's perspective. And I think we have really seen our faith communities in Camden step up. I know there were a lot of concerns at the beginning around burial and ensuring that kind of religious beliefs were held to during this crisis, and that was incredibly important to us and to me and to Abdul, and that we've had support from the community throughout for that. So I think it's working well, but I think there's we're kind of still in the crisis phase to some extent, even though we're starting to think of recovery. So there hasn't been that much time for reflection. So I think if there are gaps, either London-wide or locally, and you're seeing stuff that isn't working, then please do tell us, because we're trying to learn all the time, and if things aren't working, then we need to know.
So Georgia, just to sum up, first of all, I just started to say that I hope that you will see the South Hampstead community as partners, and if there are things that you would like from us, it's just a question of a telephone call to Rabbi Eli or to me or to Neil or to the other people with whom you have regular contact, and we'll be there to support you in every way that we can to play our part in Camden, mindful of the fact that we are by and large living in the better part of the more fortunate part of the borough, but aware of the fact that just a little bit south of us, there's enormous amount of deprivation and difficulty and vulnerability, and we would like to play our part in supporting you in all of your endeavours. And I agree with you that for all of the awfulness around us, this really is a time of enormous, enormous positive opportunity to look again at the way in which we operate, to see the art of the possible. In South Hampstead, like every other organisation, as we've scrambled to reorganise ourselves and to put ourselves on a digital platform, we've learned lots and lots of new tricks that we will want to be able to carry forward even after life goes back to a semblance of normalcy. And I'm sure that the same applies in Camden. We need to see the positive and to begin to work now to reshaping the way in which we operate, having seen what can be done, having seen the untapped spirit that there is in the community amongst ordinary people and amongst those who are employed in organizations. So this really is a moment of opportunity. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, you're such a sport, and so nice that you just come on and we can talk to you so easily. I suspect that there would have been a lot more questions, but it's unfair to take up any more of your precious time. And I hope there'll be other opportunities again for us to continue to chat together in this kind of informal forum. So thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you again in the future. And stay well.
And you too.
The closing word here from our senior Rebbiton.
Well, thanks, Georgia, really, for your energy and your compassion. I think as a faith group in the borough, it would be important in the exit from lockdown for us and other faith groups to be speaking to Camden and government, local government and national government, and see that what we need in the particularities of our faith are wise and possible in the exit. And that is an essential, I think, for perhaps Neil and Rachel and our rabbinic team to take forward with you, to model that kind of wise exit, and also to modify behaviours hitherto. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks, Georgia. Thanks, South Hampstead. Good night and see you soon.
Good night. Thank you. It's lovely to see you all. Take care.
This has been recorded, Georgia. Is it okay that we?
Of course. Yeah.
It'll be posted on our synagogue website.
Absolutely fine. Take care. Bye-bye.